Okay, let's look at lesson 8.5c. Now, these are the harder trig equations. So these take a lot of tricks. Everything from identities to the unit circle, including our reference angle charts. So what I did first on example 1 is if you divide by tangent, you're going to lose an answer. So I brought it over, subtracted it, so it's over here on this side. So hopefully I can underline this. So this is right there now, okay? And then by doing that, they both have a common tangent. I factored out a tangent out of it. I'd be left with a tangent minus 2 sine. I've got my mini equations. I've got tangent equals 0, and that happens on the unit circle at 0 and pi radians. This one's a little bit difficult because they're different. So I can change tangent sine for cosine. So then I have a common sine. So I pulled out a common sine out of these two. I'd be left with a 1 over cosine minus 2, okay? Sine of x equals 0, well, that is also on the unit circle 0 and pi, so I don't have to count that again. This, though, 1 over cosine minus 2, I brought over the 2, add 2, add 2. Since it's 1 over cosine, I flipped it to cosine equals 1 over 2, so I flipped it. And then my answers from the unit circle are at pi thirds and 5 pi thirds, okay? Example 2. So if I change it into x, I'd have a 1x squared plus 1x minus 1. It will not factor. So what we did is we used the quadratic formula. We used some technology to get the quadratic formula for us, and the quadratic formula gives us these two answers. X is a negative 1.618, and x equals a 0.618. Okay, now, so instead of x's, it's sine. So go back to the fact that we did sine. So sine of x equals a negative 1.68, and we get a sine equals a 0.68. Now, sine cannot be bigger than negative 1, so we throw that one away. You can try to calculate, but it won't work. You're going to get an error. This one I did my sine inverse. On my calculator I got 0.6662, and then it has a reference angle. Reference angle says subtract pi, so I got a 2.475. Those are my two angles, okay? Turn the page. Oh boy, example 3 is a biggie. So what I have is 4 terms. Cosine, cosine, secant. But I can change this into a cosine. So I took my secant and I changed it into 1 over cosine. Okay, now, what I have is a fraction here, and I really don't want a fraction, so I multiplied everything by cosine. So I can get rid of that, because cosine of cosine is 1. So I'll have a 2 cosine cubed minus a cosine squared equals a 2 cosine and then minus 1. Now, I'm going to factor, so I brought everything over. So I brought my 2 cosine over by subtracting it. Brought my 1 over by adding it. I see 1, 2, 3, 4 terms, so I'm going to factor by grouping. These two terms have a cosine squared in common. I'm going to factor out a cosine squared to have a 2 cosine minus 1. These two terms, I really want it to look like this, so I took out a negative 1. So I'd have a 2 cosine of x minus 1. Good. So I needed these to be the same. I just did this. Okay, so these two terms have a 2 cosine of x minus 1 in common, so I pulled that out right there. And what's left over is my cosine squared minus 1. Okay, now I've got my mini equations. 2 cosine of x minus 1 equals 0, and cosine squared of x minus 1 equals 0. Of course, I solved. Add 1 divided by 2. I get cosine is equal to 1/2, and that's on the unit circle at pi thirds and 5 pi thirds. On the second mini equation, to solve, I square rooted both sides. Oh, I added 1 first, then square rooted both sides. Square root of 1 is 1 and negative 1 is plus minus 1. So cosine of x equals 1 at 0, and cosine of x is equal to negative 1 at pi. And that's all I had. So if you have any questions, please ask me. I'm here to help.